Welcome back to Healthy Mind, Healthy Life. I'm your host Yusuf, and this is the show where we open up the conversations most people are too afraid to start. The ones about being human in a world that often asks us not to be. Today's guest has lived through a side of this conversation many of us only see from a distance. Andrew McLean is a former news reporter and has served as a police constable with the Waterloo Regional Police Service for 18 years. He's worked as a detective on major investigation, served as an acting sergeant, and trained new recruits. In 2021, after years of frontline work, Andrew was diagnosed with PTSD and has been on leave since then. He used this time to write a book about this experience and to advocate for emergency service mental health awareness. And today, we're talking about the human cost of carrying other people's worst days and what it takes to come back from that. Andrew, thank you for being here. I know this is not an easy conversation, and I'm grateful you have made space for it.
Well, I appreciate it, and I thank you for the forum to be able to have this conversation. It's sometimes not easy, but at the same time, I think it's a conversation worth having, definitely for a lot of people.
Mm. So, before we get into the harder parts, I want to start with you as a person. What pulled you toward this work in the first place? And was the version of you who first put on the uniform very different from the one sitting with me today?
Yes, and yes. I would say that what drew me into policing is it's actually very common. Amongst most people who get drawn into emergency services, they have a need to help, and they just want to help fellow man. They want to help people in the worst times of their lives and victims and that sort of thing, but they also want to catch bad guys and keep society safe. So I think it's a call to service, and some of us that's really the reason to do it. It's to help. The person sitting in front of you today is definitely a different person than who first put on the uniform. That's for sure. I you know through my time as a reporter and starting in policing, I was, not really aware of how much of an empath I was. I was very into people pleasing, um, conflict resolution. I was the kid that all my friends came to help them through the problems, and so I thought I would be very well suited to that. And then, I kind of did that in my journalism career as well. Um, and so I thought, I would be prepared for that. However, right from the first day that I started on the road with my own coach officer, I very quickly realized what lurks underneath everyone's sort of pleasured existence. I often say we dealt with the 1% of the population and protected 99% of the population from that 1%. Um, so, in the community you live in, it was quite the eye opener to realize just what lurks underneath the surface. Even in normal looking homes, there's domestic disputes that we have to solve. There's all sorts of things that I just don't think normal people can be prepared for. And no matter how prepared you are for it, you can't be prepared for it. It's like one of those jobs across emergency services, really nursing, doctoring, and all that stuff too. That they could train you all you want, but once you're immersed into the actual call itself or the situation itself, no amount of experience on whatever job you did before can prepare you for that type of responsibility.
Hmm. Yeah. And, you know, there's this misunderstanding that, or the image that we hold of officers as unshakable as the ones who handle it. But from the inside, what is the biggest myth about what strength actually looks like and what it costs to you guys?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's outwardly, we'll see that stoic sort of neutral person who, has to step into a situation and assume control because that's basically what you have to do. You're the one now in control of people's lives and the situations that you find yourself in. You're the one that these people are looking to for leadership. So outwardly, your second persona, I guess, kind of just takes over, and you do it, right? Because that's what you have to do. Inwardly, you don't really think about the gravity or the danger of the situation sometimes, or the sheer heartbreak of the situation until after, because the mask comes off. So like, I almost look at it like you have two personalities. Like there's cop Andy, and then there was human Andy, and then human Andy would take over. And um, when you're private or you're alone, you have time to reflect on what you just did and what just happened and what could have happened, and you kind of leave a piece of yourself at every call. Now, it's the calls where human Andy and cop Andy have to overlap. So when you're giving people really bad news, like a loved one just died in a car accident, or was just murdered, or committed suicide or something like that, human Andy also has to take over. You got to be the one giving them a hug. You have to be the one to kind of guide them through the grief, and in the immediate aftermath of finding out news like that, because you never know how someone's going to respond, right? And sometimes
Yeah.
people respond very, very emotionally, and you have to be the one contained, and to let them vent, let them talk, let them do whatever it is they got to do, but be that pillar of strength for them as well, so that they're allowed to be weak. And that, those are the calls that mostly take a toll on people who care. And because you can't help but to put yourself in their situation, and because if you don't, you really can't deliver the news or be as supportive as you need to be, especially in situations that are delicate like that.
And the public image of strength is one thing, but the human reality of it is something we almost never get to hear about.
That's very true. And like, I think, the average person would have an interaction with, say, a police officer like me. I pull them over on the side of the road, maybe give them a speeding ticket or something like that, but that's like less than 1% of the job. I mean, for me anyway, you've sworn to uphold the law, but also protect the public. So a lot of what we do, doesn't make the news, and stuff that affects us doesn't really make the news. So people don't really think about the human toll that you take, like when you're giving a death notification, for instance, and you're telling a wife with young children that their husband was killed in a construction accident or a car accident or something like that. Um, that's obviously not going to make the news. But those are the ones that carry the heaviest, because, I can tell you from experience, every time you drive by that house, you look around, you see if those kids are okay or how they're managing, and you wonder what, what I could have done differently or how I can help these people. And then when you add that times 100, times 1,000, you know, um, over the course of your career, you can't help but to be reminded of true human suffering no matter where you go. And, that's, people think of well, we must see a whole bunch of things. Well, yeah, we do. We do. And I'm not discounting that. It's just your need to help almost becomes so overwhelming, but you start to realize that you can't really help everybody, right? You can only help those who want help, but at the same time, like, you can't help that wife who lost her husband. There's nothing you can do about it. And as problem fixers, it's a very hard pill for us to swallow. And it's not a selfish thing. It's more just an empathy thing. Like, I couldn't imagine being given the same news, you know what I mean? And
Mhm.
having to carry on. So you carry that pain to the next call, to the next
Yeah.
call. And I think what a lot of people in the public don't understand too is that, you could have just had a call like that. You could have had just a devastating call, but it's only an hour into your shift or 2 hours into your shift, and you got to move on to that neighbor dispute, or something that, should be able to be solved by two rational people who can talk to one another. And so maybe that police officer shows up a little bit grumpy and doesn't want to, maybe you get a bad impression about that. But what you have to understand is, what did that officer do before they just arrived here for this call? and to listen to you complain about, it took you 8 hours to get here, or I filed my complaint yesterday. How come it takes so long? And I see you guys in parking lots doing nothing, sort of stuff. And all of that kind of weighs on you a little bit. You can't really react, but,
Yeah.
you start to become bitter and angry. Yeah.
And you, underneath the uniform, underneath the calls, underneath the cases, there's a nervous system absorbing all of it. So when you look back now, what do you see as the real quiet patterns that build up over the years? The things that were not a single moment, but a slow accumulation.
It was a slow accumulation. And when I do look back on it, it was very slow. It happens so almost so slowly you don't notice it. So, it started manifesting itself with just stress, lack of sleep. So I would be constantly thinking about work and I would not be able to wind down. You could feel your heart racing. So these are kind of the physical signs. You start having nightmares and dreams about work. You can't turn it off. So, just driving down the street with your family in the car, you're always scanning your environment. When you go to a restaurant, you're scanning the crowd and, you're looking for potential troublemakers, wondering what you're going to do in this situation. And these intrusive thoughts start coming in, when your mind starts playing tricks on you, essentially, when you think you see someone all of a sudden and it's not that person. So your body's always constantly reacting to its environment. And I can't stress enough about the dreams. Like, you could have a very horrific call and you're dreaming about it and thinking about it. So you're not really sleeping either. So your body never really rests. And
Mm.
the accumulation of that alone, um has a devastating effect on my physical health, but it happened so slowly that I was just didn't realize it. You almost look like like a slow leak in a tire. You don't notice it until it's flat and it's too late.
Yeah.
It was kind of the same thing with me, and yeah, those slow started accumulations after that started, then my, other physiological things would start to happen. So like my hands would shake if I was going to a call. I couldn't control my nervousness. I wasn't fearful, but I was angry. I would be you know, just in my even my personal life, I would always be in a rush, to get somewhere. And if I couldn't make it in time, I was devastated and I was angry. I would always kind of if I was driving home from work, for instance, and I had to get my kids and people are just driving like normal, like normal people, but I would be so angry because I had to get through traffic to get to where I needed to be, and I had a set time limit to get there. So I would always start to get sort of jealous, and I call the jealous of the normals that could just be blissfully unaware and just take their time and go somewhere and not have to be constantly under the gun like I was, and I often wondered
Mm.
what it would be like. So these are all changes that were happening to me at the time, and like in reflection, I know that this was the onset of my PTSD for sure. But yeah, and after that, it just grew more into anger. So I become more cynical. Um, you start to recognize patterns in people. You start to not really care anymore. You kind of go numb because as an empath, you absorb everything. So your body starts to shut down essentially because your body's telling you like, and your brain's saying, I can't take it anymore. Like your brain fog, can't think clearly. All of these things. And I didn't understand it until I finally broke. That's when I understood something was totally wrong. And that's when I went and got help because, you just do stupid stuff. You're thrill seeking. You're driving like an idiot. You know, and for some people that I talk to, sex, drugs, alcohol, all of that stuff to just feel something because you're just basically dead inside. So it really comes on over years, I would say. Um, but it starts so insidiously, and the culture inside is that it's part of the job. So that's what you keep
Mm.
telling yourself, right? Like, this is a part of the job, like not everybody witnesses what we witness. So this is a part of the job. And
Yeah.
that's the culture inside of it as well. It's like, oh, that's just the part of the job. You suck it up and you move on, right? And you don't want to report that you're feeling weird because what's that going to do to your career as well? So, a lot of guys are out there suffering in silence because they don't realize what's happening to them, which is kind of the purpose of what I'm doing. You know, take it from me.
Uh, You know, so much of what we call burnout or breakdown is not sudden. It is the body finally putting down something it has been quietly holding for a very, very long time.
Yeah. And that's why it was important before when I kind of alluded to I was the friend that all my friends came to. So before policing, like I grew up that way. So I was an only child. If my parents fought, I would be the peacemaker. I'd have to settle all of these disputes. And, if my cousins or my friends who had brothers were fighting, I couldn't stand it. The one thing I've come to realize is I don't like conflict, ironically. I hate it. So I need to solve it before I can be happy. And that's kind of how I grew up, and that was my mentality growing up. So I couldn't really be happy until everyone else was. So going into policing, was the natural step. You want to help everybody. But at the same time, when you have that kind of people pleasing sort of personality, which is necessary, but at the same time, it's also it's very much a curse because you're trying to live up to an impossible standard. And, when you start seeing that all this work you're putting in really doesn't really do anything, or you're just running around putting bandages on people and you're not really solving people's problems like what you had signed up for, and you're getting yelled at the whole time and being called things you're not and all this other stuff. Um, yeah, you just start to lose focus and you just and it turns into bitterness and anger. That's really how it manifests itself, honestly. It's not You're not blowing up at people, you just don't care anymore. You're numb. Like you just walk around like a zombie, your eyes have the 1,000-yard gaze. People often talk about that with PTSD where guys just zone out and you're just looking off into the distance at nothing and you're like, "You okay, bud?" That's what happens because you're just living your thoughts. You're living your past experience. So, um, yeah, it's kind of, you know, it's hard because in order to do the job properly, you kind of need that personality, but that personality will ultimately be your downfall in your career because it's just an impossible standard to live up to.
Yeah. And you, for people who want to connect with you or want to learn more about your work, where can they do that?
They can look up my Instagram page. It's Beaten Black and Blue Book. You'll see a smiley picture of me in front of a sunset. That's my main social media page. I'm also have a web page that you can connect to on my Instagram page, which leads you to the book. The book is available on Amazon, on all platforms around the world. So whatever country you're in, just log on to Amazon, type in Beaten Black and Blue or my name, Andrew McLean, and it'll come up. Um, and yeah, I mean, that's basically how you can get connected to me. And if you want to reach out, the best way is through Instagram Messenger. I do check that regularly. I have a lot of people that reach out, and I try to get back to everybody as well. Like it the start of this journey was more of a like self-healing thing, I thought. But, the amount of people that have clung on to this movement and have reached out to me really shows the need for this to be highlighted. And, again, I thank you for the forum to be able to do that.
You're most welcome. And to everyone listening, all these links are in the show notes, so you can just go and check those out. Andrew, any last message that you want to leave us with?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, the one part of my book that was very hard to write was about my suicide attempt while I was on the job. And if there's one thing that I can impart on people right now is that the world is a much better place with you in it than with you out of it. It does get better, but it's work. But let's take this journey together, let's rock this and realize your true potential of what you can be. Sometimes you got to start over again. Realize, discover yourself, find out what makes you happy, and screw the rest of them, honestly. Concentrate on yourself. You don't have to feel guilty by concentrating on yourself.
Mm. Andrew, thank you for the courage and clarity you brought into this conversation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me, man. Like, this is a great conversation.
And to everyone listening, That was Andrew McLean, reminding us that the strongest people in our lives are often the ones quietly carrying the most, and that asking for help is not the end of strength, it is the beginning of healing. If anything in this conversation reached a part of you that you usually try to keep quiet, please don't carry it alone tonight. Reach out to a friend, a family member, to a trained listener at a local helpline. You matter, and your story is not finished. This has been Healthy Mind, Healthy Life. Take care of your mind, take care of your heart, and please take care of each other. I'll see you in the next one.